Greetings, gamers, and welcome to the 10th live stream from the MisfitGamersStudios. I'm your host, Vortex, and this is D&D Discussions. Today, I'm going to be talking about a topic that I had brought up a couple days ago when Kage was here in the studio with me, and it's going to be more focused today on the various types of roleplay that you're more likely going to encounter playing D&D long enough at one point or another. Now, by no means is this going to be an extensive list of every type of roleplay that you can possibly imagine, but I want to break it down into what I consider the four main categories of the types of roleplay that I've experienced, the types of roleplay that I use or have used in the past, and it's more of a category, I guess, in not terms of the type of roleplay, but more of the level of roleplay. But again, these are all kind of intertwined terms that I'm thinking about it. So I think we'll just kind of get into it. But for me, I would say that there are four primary categories or four primary types of roleplay or role players that you're gonna find in D&D, and I'm going to break them down in terms of how I feel about them and weighing some pros and cons. And then I really want to stress on, depending on the type of which player that you are or the type of DM that you are, I want to discuss about how you can lean into all of these, whether or not they have benefits or not. I still think they're all valuable. I still think they all can be used. And I feel like both DMs and players can lean heavily into every type of roleplay that each player will bring. And that's kind of what I want to do here, is break those down and kind of give an idea of how I've used them and how I've seen other people and their experiences and how those situations can be improved. So the types of roleplay. So the four main types that I would have are essentially tiers of interactiveness, and again, this could be considered as levels, but again, the nuances of how you interact throughout the game will also depend on what category you'll fall into. So top category, I kind of like to call this one the performance level of roleplay. This is essentially when someone wants to completely embody the character throughout the entire gaming session. So this is a full in-character, I am who I'm playing, and everything they do, full dialogue. And again, doesn't necessarily have to mean that they have a voice and all of that, but this is somebody who essentially plays their character while they are playing their character in-game. And right off the bat, nothing wrong with this level. I think, for the most part, this is one of the most fun ones to watch. I mean, this is really what you want to, when you want to watch a game or a D&D group on YouTube and stuff. I think that's kind of what we all would want to see. We would all want to watch everyone full on in character doing these performances, and if you can do the voices on the level of an actor, I mean, that's great and all. But the cons of this, I think, have come down to the fact that a lot of people have a high expectation of this, or at least they feel like this is the goal to obtain. And while it's good from a performance entertainment standpoint of watching a D&D game, the problem is the ones that are the most fun to watch are typically the ones that are either scripted or they're done by people who act and perform professionally and have done so for a very long time. So things like ad-libbing and playing in the moment and just kind of keeping in character at all times does come more naturally to people like them. And there are other people who can just naturally do that, who are more able to stay in character for those full extent of time. And it's the best when the entire gaming group is on board. I think these are the best times to do this, are when you have a DM and all of the other players who basically want to have a full immersive game where everyone's in character at all times, everyone's interacting with each other as the characters would. And I think that's absolutely great. The difficulties absolutely start to come when you have someone in the group that's not as creative or not as able to keep up with things. But it also comes down to, if you're the only one in the group who is that full-on character, it's not only going to become difficult for you, but it will become difficult for other players in the group that aren't that invested or are not that attuned with being able to be in character and handle someone in character at all times. So, and I know DMs as well will struggle with this because it's almost as if I've seen DMs get derailed a little bit in terms of someone's performance getting in the way of the flow of the game, or essentially making I mean, really, I guess flow of the game is really like the biggest culprit when you only have one person in the group that's kind of doing all of this outlandish acting. Most parts of the game will become either stale, or the timelines will just be more difficult to keep up because maybe the rest of the group is trying to get through certain pieces of information or a piece of dialogue or a certain part of the map, and the in character, the performance character may be lagging behind a little bit or preventing the rest of the group from moving forward. So really a lot of challenges with that one, but it's not necessarily that bad. I think again, this should be mostly reserved for a gaming group that really wants all of this. But if you are a diehard player and this is how you play your character and you don't have another choice, a lot of the times I think just really talking with your DM and finding out a good balance of when the DM can kind of let you have the reins and do your character thing, and balancing when you need to understand it's more metagamey time or it's just more kind of get to the point time and let the character stuff subside. Because again, no one wants to not have the gaming experience that they're looking forward to. Like, nobody wants to go into a game and specifically not do the thing that they really want to do. But again, because you're in, a gaming group, especially if you have a lot of players, everybody has to be compromising, right? So if everybody's not that level of character, either the DM can give you more reign with that, and I think that would be a great opportunity to talk to them and just say, hey, I'm really into my character, just let me know, because they're, make a cue, to where it's like, hey, if I'm going too much, let me know and I'll try to remember to back off. Or, if this is one of those moments I can really let loose, like, can you just let me know so I can like have my fun? And as for DMs, if you're struggling to keep up with those kind of characters, just find my advice for that would be find ways to spark that out of them. I mean, if they're not obnoxious and they're not already doing it far too much, but you're just struggling with not being the DM that is as invested as they are into these characters, you can try to be that. You can try to make your NPCs more rich and more fulfilling. Or you can give these performance characters just more to work with. I mean, you may not be, able to do voices and able to do, characters and be able to enact whatever you want. But if you're more detailed with what's going on, you're giving these performers basically more of a script to run with. So that would be my advice for DMs. And if you're struggling with keeping someone on the reins, if you're a DM and you have players or a player who's on the higher end of that, of wanting to perform everything, and it is causing, lag in your game, or it is just causing troubles, the best thing to do, I mean, just like with the player, it's talk to them, let them know what's going on. I mean, in the end, you run the game, so if you're having troubles keeping the flow of things, you might just have to, start cutting them off quicker. Or you might have to start putting penalties on their verboseness and taking too much time. Put a time cap on, everybody's chance. Like, okay, everybody gets 2 minutes. Whatever you get, move on, because I got other players. These are all techniques that I've seen used. I mean, really, if you have a player that's just doing that and they're just unwilling to listen, I mean, it's really hard outside of threatening to kick them out of the group. But not a lot of people want to do that. So, it's harder to stop someone from doing it, but if you just can't keep up with it, I think it's a lot easier to find ways to encourage it from them and let them kind of feed off of the details that you're giving. Because that's really what, essentially for them, I feel like a lot of those people who want to perform out, it is like a script to them. Not that they're reading off their lines, but they're reading a script and a setting and a story that they get to then ad lib their dialogue into. And if you treat it like that, but you can't keep up with your own acting, just produce more of that scenery and more of that backstrip that they can feed off of, and let them roll with it. Really, if you can't sound like a scared child, or a scared, old man that they're, like trying to get information out of, or you can't sound like a gruff bandit who, couldn't care less about dying. But if you put the detail into what they hear and what they see, if you let them know how the person sounds without acting it out, let them paint the picture, and then their reactions will be much more encouraged, because you're giving them all of those details that they otherwise are lacking, but essentially you're giving them in return that equal offering, right? They're giving all of this performance, and you're giving them an equal level of detail that they can work with, versus, he's scared. Yeah, you've scared him. And again, I've seen that, where that's one of the struggles is with these, performance players. It's not that they need the justification, or they need the constant approval of their role playing, but when you do put that much effort in and you don't get a somewhat leveled response, it does feel like a waste, or it can just eventually become less fun to do. Which, I mean, if you're that kind of DM, that is another option for you. If you're trying to find a way to limit someone's overperformance, you could stop acknowledging it as much. It's kind of a dick move, but again, if you've tried everything else and they're just not interested, you could just cut them off and say, "Oh yeah, that's cool. Yeah, he's afraid of you," and then just kind of move on, because you're, letting them know you're getting to a point to where all of that information doesn't matter. Which if you've heard me talk before, that's not something I would normally advise, but this is a tough situation, because if the group isn't jiving with it, it's a difficult habit to want to break off of a player. But at the same time, it really depends on, are you the one having an issue with it, or is it the gaming group? Because if everybody loves it and you're just kind of mad that the person takes all of your thunder, the biggest hardship I can say, it's not really a hardship. The biggest thing I can say about that is, like, get good, because that just means they're a better player and more entertaining. And if you're jealous over that, I can't help you with that one. You're going to have to find a way to entice your players again, because that's what they seem to be drawn to at the time. But if it's truthfully disrupting the game and causing it to be difficult for you to do your DMing, that has to be something that has to be addressed. And whether it's working out a system of letting them know when it's, too much, a queue system to let them know when they need to knock it down, or giving them very specific times where they can just get all of their creativity out, so they can, kind of be kept in line for the rest of the game. I think those are all good starting points for those kind of players. And on the reverse side too, I don't know if I've ever met a player who's truthfully had a problem with a overperforming DM. I could see that being an issue for some players who are more analytical and who just want to get down to it. But I don't really know, other than bringing that up as well. But at the same time, usually if you're a pretty good performing DM, that's usually why people are playing with you. I don't think you're going to, attract a lot of analytical, paper-only players if you are a very boisterous and charismatic DM. So not as much to do that. Hey, Baba Kiss, what up? Boom, bap, bada, boom, 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 bap. But you're not a rapper. Okay, well, that's fine. I am. That's fine. I like the beat, though. I could work with that. All right. So so I think that pretty much covers the highest level of role-playing kind of DMs and players, is that performance level. So I think it's great. I think it's a lot of fun. I think it's best used when everybody wants to do it, and it's best used for the entertainment value. But at the end of the day, it's gonna be difficult if you were the only person in that gaming group and you're just really trying to go over the top and nobody else is. And sorry, DMs who have 2 characters that are like that. Like if you have 2 players who all they want to do is outperform each other, and then you have like 4 others that just want to play the damn game, yeah, all my advice goes out the window because they're going to be annoying to deal with. So good luck. But yeah, it's one of those things where I would prefer, I don't do well with that. I'm actually kind of jealous over the DMs who can really stay in character and keep all of their NPCs, you know, with voices and characters and keep everything in line. I think it's fantastic. I on the fly, I can't do it. I mean, I can barely do it when I try to do like my audiobook auditions, just trying to keep just 2 people in a conversation, and that's with me studying and actually like taking time with it. I really don't know how people can do it like on the fly like that. But that's probably why I think it's more of a problem if you're by yourself doing it. But again, I've seen this in other gaming groups, and if you're the only one doing it, it tends to get out of hand after a while, because it's also, I think, people who do play that performance role, if they're the only ones there, I think a lot of the times they feel like they have to add more to the game because no one else is, which is a shame, because a lot of the times you can have a really fun time with someone who does all of those performances in spurts, but if they feel like they have to overdo it to make the entire game interesting, I think it really starts to rub people the wrong way after a while. But yes, so tier 1, performer. Down to the second tier. So this one's going to be kind of a step down from that. And this is definitely much more of the way I like to... this is like 50-50 where I land on being a DM. This is typically how I play as a player, but as a DM, I'm usually here or the next notch down, but we'll get into that one in a second. So the second tier down from the full performance, I'm in character at all times. I live and breathe my character while I'm playing my DM or my D&D game. The next notch down from there is what I essentially just call like the player with a character, or, you know, the once in a while I'm in character player. And this is typically how I play, and this is about 50% of how I DM. And I think that this is probably the most common that I've seen. And this is essentially playing your character or becoming your character and voicing your character in the correct moments, but not necessarily throughout every instance, every interaction. It's not like you guys are, in between battles or just traveling from one shop to the next, and then you have to have a sidebar conversation in character. But these are the moments where if you're talking with an NPC and you have questions, you'll, dip and change your voice tone. You may not have a full voice, or you may not have this full-on character that you can get into and act out, but it's those times when you've decided, okay, I'm going to change my mannerisms. I'm going to change my speech pattern. I'm going to change my voice higher, low pitch, because it's going to indicate I'm in character. These, I think, again, are the most common. I think it's the easiest to do because you kind of have a general idea of what your character's like. And then once, of course, you get comfortable in your gaming group, I think you just see this happen naturally, where people just kind of slip into naturally like reacting as their character would. I think this is where I have the most fun, both as a DM and as a player, because you start to lose, I think once you start doing this, you get to like lose the mechanic side of things. You get to kind of lose the fact that it's, dice and paper rolls, and again, you're getting into the story a little bit more. For me, I find it akin to like listening to an audiobook. When everyone's kind of doing that partial in character in those right moments, it really allows me to get into what's happening in the game a little bit more than just kind of just listening to, drawn out paragraphs of just details of what's happening. Makes it feel a little bit more real, makes me also pay more attention. Having ADHD makes it sometimes a little bit difficult to keep going with everything. So when people kind of slip in that little nuance of character, I think it also makes it easier to pay attention. It makes it easier to remember who's who. And this is why I think this is great for me being a DM too, is being able to, without having the ability to get fully into character and fully animate myself for every NPC, being able to do those slight nuance changes, being able to change just like the slight pitch of my voice, or a lot of the times what I'll do is I change like my speech pattern. That's the biggest way that I typically will keep my NPCs separate in dialogue and in gaming sessions, because it's something I can do, like, at least right then and there, without having to worry about keeping, multiple characters and multiple voices on the ready and also paying attention to everybody else. But it also adds that slight level of immersion without having to, I guess, feel, for some people, like, embarrassed about, making up a voice. I think that's what holds a lot of people back. I mean, I know not everybody can do voice acting, but I've played a lot of D&D, and usually when people finally kind of, get comfortable, it really doesn't matter how good you are. It really doesn't. I mean, any level of change, any kind of ability to distinguish just your normal everyday voice and kind of get into your character, or at least bring that game to life a little bit, always makes the game session better. I've never seen something like that worse in a gaming session, because that's kind of what we're all here to do. We're here to bring that story to life. We're here to enrich it one way or another. And so this is where I kind of would encourage a lot of people to try to achieve and get to that point. And it does take a little bit of breaking that, like, confidence barrier. It takes a little bit of, being a little bit, like, self-conscious and breaking through that. Doesn't happen a lot with, like, extroverted people. I've seen a lot of people take to this very easily, where, half the time they're doing a full performance, and then the other half they have the mannerisms and the body language, and they just have something to their voice pattern that just indicates that their character is speaking. And it gets to be a lot of fun, but I will admit it was one of the hardest things for me to do. When I first started out, I was much more narrative when it came to my play style. As a player, I rarely ever spoke in character. I would always say things like, "Oh, well, he says this," and I would always, summarize it. And I very rarely ever, like, I think for, like, the first year I was gaming, maybe for the first 2 years, I hardly was in character. And there was eventually a point to where my DM at the time just kept forcing dialogue on me in certain situations to finally, like, get me to play the character. There were even times where the situation would even call for, it's like I couldn't just describe it. I would actually, like, have to do it in order to actually accomplish whatever it is that we were doing in that gaming session. And over time, I eventually started feeling more comfortable and started actually, like, speaking in character, started finding ways to make mannerisms for my characters. Still not good at doing a lot of voices, but I feel like I'm very confident with between, like, body language and the mannerisms and the voice patterns. I think just adding little tweaks like that bring a character to life so much more. And when you can add that into also having just a good ability to describe what you're doing, both as a DM and as a player, these really bring a game to life a lot more. I mean, I feel like this is kind of obvious stuff. I feel like, a lot of people are probably just, thinking that this is just kind of like a duh moment. But again, we're just talking about the various levels of roleplay. I do think this is the most common. I do think this is the most achievable, in terms of wanting, if you want to actually bring your character to life more. And for those that are not as confident in, being, acting out like that. Again, small little things. You don't have to do a whole lot. Trying to think of an example, for my wife's campaign, she has an NPC that she adventures with, and I rarely ever, like, they do have conversations between them, but I really don't get into character with this NPC just because it is a lot. She's very egotistical, very I'm sexy and it kind of personality, and constantly arrogant, constantly witty, constantly aggressive, constantly egotistical. Basically, the NPC is a lot of things that I am not in terms of a personality. In trying to play that character can be very difficult for me, because switching from being just normal me playing D&D, trying to keep my story straight, and then switching into this, I'm pretty much better than everybody who walks around me mentality, and trying to come up with something, extremely witty or funny or, insulting in that moment, isn't as easy for me to always do. But sometimes when I'm in the mood, I can play that character in full. But at least for keeping consistency's sake, when she's talking, at least I can make some sort of comment about what you're wearing. And it could be something as small as that. That's probably a bad example, but something as small as that, where not even going fully into character, but breaking what would normally be my DM speech pattern, normally what would be almost my attitude, my tone, that right there can be enough to at least keep my gaming sessions going and keep me concentrated on which NPC is talking as well. Because for me, trying to keep large conversations going, especially if I have a gaming group of 5 or 6 people and they're talking to 2 or 3 different NPCs, it gets difficult for me to keep track, and it gets difficult for them to keep track. So being able to make those slight alterations also gives them, not just helps me understand, where I'm at in the conversation, but it also gives them feedback. It gives them some kind of personality other than just the information they're getting. So depending on how they're also reacting to those types of personalities and those type of small mannerism changes can also help keep me in track of who they're talking to. Because, hopefully each NPC is giving off a different type of personality towards that character, and that character will act in kind to that personality. So little tips and tricks that I do to keep my gaming sessions flowing, because a lot of the times, instead of just making a ton of notes and having to constantly pick things up, read them, and then go back to a person, these are the kind of little mental post-it notes that I put everywhere. So as I'm going through each gaming session, and as we're going through these long dialogue sessions, it's ways to kind of keep me positioned in the conversation, so I'm kind of up to date with where everybody's at and I don't lose my place. And it's also nice to use those small mannerism changes, because depending on how you use them, you can also help have those as benchmarks for a conversation. So you can, depending upon how you're working with that character, you can do small little outbursts or small little deviations to the already small bit that you're doing to kind of benchmark either where you're at in the conversation, or change the tone of the conversation with, again, not having to fully act it out. I think the pros far outweigh the cons on this particular type of role play. In particular, it's easy in the sense that you're not having to act, but you are trying to bring your character to life. The cons are, it really doesn't come off as entertaining all the time, but it does provide some good opportunities for some real, just wholesome fun with your characters, because I feel like when you're fully acting out your characters, some things are almost expected, because you play them all long enough, you're kind of expecting how certain interactions are going to go. But when you're kind of just doing those little spurts where in the right moments you're giving more life to your character, I find that, especially when people get a lot more comfortable in the D&D groups, those little spurts catch people off guard a lot more. And I think that's where you get the more genuine memorable stories from D&D groups, is when somebody slips into character just kind of out of nowhere and catches everybody off guard, and then everybody else has to scramble to get into character to respond. And I think those are just some of my favorite stories, because as much as I've seen and watched really good acted out D&D, not that it just seems always predictable, but it doesn't seem as genuine when everything feels that well structured. It doesn't feel as genuine as when you hear just a bunch of people, completely lose it and almost forget how to be in character. So I would say that, yeah, the cons of this is you're not going to get as many of those entertaining moments, and this probably isn't going to be I don't know how this would rank in terms of like watching it. This is actually a little bit more like the podcast that we did that I still haven't figured out how to post on YouTube yet. So I'm gonna hope to post that on YouTube eventually. But this is the same type of style that I would say that our D&D podcast is. It's definitely much more of this 50-50, partially in character, in the moments, and then partially not. We're definitely not the full acted out type. And I will say that one of the cons is if you're looking to like make something that's entertaining, it's very difficult to do that with audio only, because I've watched a lot, I've listened to a lot of podcasts, and I've watched a lot of D&D, and I've noticed that when you're not as good at being in character like I am, it's harder to get that across in audio only. So I kind of wish that we would have done a little bit more on the video side of that podcast, because I think it would have been a little bit more entertaining, although editing would have been a lot worse. So we may not have actually had that much of a problem. But again, pro is that this is one of the, easier accessible ones to do for a gaming group. And again, I don't really think there's a lot of cons to trying to game like this. I think that it's always something to be strived for. And again, I don't think it takes having a character, having a voice, and having, this whole concept of having to perform or act, being able to just make small adjustments to bring that character to life, whether it's slowing your speech or speeding it up, slightly raising or lowering your voice, adding more uhs and ums that are intentional if your character isn't as intelligent, even adding phrases, just making sure that you add the phrases if your character likes, if you're playing a character that's egotistical and likes to think of himself as extremely intelligent, add in more of the actuallys, it is part of your speech pattern. You don't have to fully act out being, a jerk about it, but adding that little bit of, essence to your character can really bring that help bring it to life, and kind of help get you to that point to where you can start going into that full performance level where you can actually like become the character, act out, and be more of that like entertaining value if that's what you're going for. But small steps, trying to just bring a little bit of life to each character, just little by little. And let's see here. Next level down, so level 3 of roleplay, I would say that this is definitely going to be the most that you would see typically in like newer gaming groups. I like to call this the more narrative style of gameplay. This is where I basically started. When I very first started playing D&D, I wasn't confident at all, didn't really ever do anything like voices or anything else like that in any other type of games. So it was kind of new to me. I was in a gaming group who, some of them were really good at playing characters. Others were more of the, the in-character level, to where they had all of their own mannerisms. But these were also people that I gamed with who had, each of them had at least, a dozen or 2 dozen, characters at any given time actively, like in various gaming groups. And it was very weird for me to be around people who could play that much. I was struggling keeping one character going, and they had, one person like 15 different characters that they were actively run. And that mind boggled me that they were able to keep track of, all of that at the time. So I started out, and essentially I wanted to get into playing the game. I wanted to get into this, storytelling type of game, but I wasn't ready to become a character. I wasn't ready to do voices, wasn't ready to have like different personas and everything. So I defaulted, but I wanted to try. So I started with this like narrative style of gameplay, which is basically, without getting into character, I would just be as detailed as I could describing what I was trying to do. And try to see how much my DM could work with that. So a lot of the times I wasn't good, even with like dialogue, like my DM would try to get into character and have a dialogue with me. And even that I struggled with at first. I couldn't sit there and talk, like as if I was talking to, like, it just didn't make sense to me at the time of like talking in character to another character. So a lot of the times I would just narrate things. I would describe what I wanted to say and how I wanted to say it without saying it, without actually coming up with the words, because didn't know how to do that at the time. But being able to describe all of the ways that I wanted to say something and describe, like, at least like the intent, the intended outcome, the intent of what I was trying to say. Maybe, and then started throwing in like, okay, I would want to use these keywords, and then this is what I'm trying to get across. It wasn't the greatest, and it was a very clunky way of gaming, especially when it comes to dialogue. I mean, it's fine when it came to, combat. It was fine when it came to adventuring and puzzle solving, but for, a good chunk of the game when trying to deal with NPCs, it didn't work as well. So I eventually wanted to work on doing that, and that's where I started to learn those little things. First, just how to talk in character, just first how to ask questions as if I'm asking, the NPC myself, how to decide what my character's personality is and how can I bring that out without, acting, right? Like how can I make these things apparent without having to come up with an actual, like, whole personality. And I think that the challenges here are pretty apparent. It really doesn't work for game, like game flow and time flow in most D&D groups, because if everyone's sitting there over explaining, or even if one person's trying to over explain, or if you're in a gaming group of people who are at least somewhat in character, if not like being able to do a full performance, it can, not ruin it, but it can bring them a little bit out of their element, because they're just getting more raw data and not really getting something to work with. But it's also not a bad start. It's not a bad place to start, because again, D&D is all about building that story, and just because you can't play a character doesn't mean you can't add to that story. And that's, I think, really where the pro comes to having this. And I also don't think it's a bad place to start, because I know a lot of gaming groups kind of lean on the DM for a lot of the narration. I mean, for obvious reasons. But I mean, in the sense that unless there's a dice roll or unless there's a conversation, I've seen a lot of gaming groups where the players kind of just take a back seat to everything else. Whereas starting out here in this like narrative type of role play, it got me to a point to where, even though I started getting into character and being able to actually have, my character's voice and actually speak in character and do things to differentiate the different characters that I would play and have those little nuances and have those changes in my voice, I was still able to add more to it, because I was so used to narrating everything that I would still add in those like little bits and pieces. And I find that as a DM now, I find one of my challenges is, or one of the things that I struggle with, is how to properly encourage my players to be more narrative in their game. And I kind of implored this for everybody, is I think that there's one thing where the DM has to maintain control, has to maintain consistency, and has to maintain the direction of the game. And there's also maintaining like, maintaining the mechanics, of course. Players can't just willy-nilly start throwing out anything and everything they want to do. But there is a point and a good balance that I've seen in a lot of gaming groups where when the players can add to the proceedings, when they can actually add, not necessarily to the scenery, but when they can truly add what's going on, and when they're not reliant on the DM to tell them every small detail about their character and what their character's doing. I think that's something that a lot of players lack, especially the ones that like to perform it with their character, because I've seen a lot focus more on how their character sounds, how their character's going to be, and less on like the actual specifics and mannerisms in game of what the character's doing. I find that when people do nail that, when they nail those mannerisms, and when they add that extra narrative description to the things that their character is doing, and just, the general aura of their character, like the full-on description that would bring in all of those elements that they are enacting in their character, and like when they're actually acting it out. I think that's just something that is great when you see it, but I don't see that in a lot of normal games, where I think a lot of the players are more focused on the dialogue, more focused on the dice rolls, and then they kind of just wait for every last detail on the DM, which some DMs prefer that. But if you are a DM who seems to, if you're like me, who at the start, when I started, I felt like I wasn't filling in all the holes. I feel like I wasn't painting the full picture quite right at the very beginning. And this was one of those things that I tried to get from my players. Is I would ask them more questions when they wanted to do something. I would ask them like, okay, so how would you do it? Or how would, character's name pull that off in this situation? I would kind of ask them questions to get them asking more questions so we could build that whole situation together. And so again, as going back to just narrative roleplay, I think it's a good element to have. I think everybody should be able to adopt that. Other than just being able to speak as your character, but also understand, the space that your character occupies, I guess. If you're a boisterous paladin in, bright, shiny armor, it's one thing to be able to enact this boisterous voice, but, being able to add that narration that, as you have that boisterous voice and you smile and your teeth, sparkle as shiny as, your armor does, adding that like natural flair, that narrative of your character, that essence that your character, the space that your character takes up, and adding those things, being a rogue and, and playing with a dagger, or being able to holster a dagger with a little bit of flair, or, being an archer and being able to, use your arrow, in a unique way, or, sheath an arrow, in a very cool way. These little like narrative tips, I think I don't see as much with players, and I think would be beneficial because players taking more agency with their character and with the way that they influence the world, I think can add a lot to gameplay as well. Because I think, again, with moderation and with DMs keeping it under control, I think this also allows for more opportunities for the players to inspire the DM, and vice versa, the players to inspire each other to interact. Because a lot of the times, if they're beholden on the DM, maybe things are missed. Maybe your character has something that is unique that would stand out to another player and their character, but if you're not the one to narrate it and the DM isn't thinking it's important, that could go a whole couple gaming sessions before you find out, like what holy symbol your paladin's actually wearing, or you find out that, your paladin has, maybe like your barbarian has colors of a tribe that you've been looking for, and you haven't ever asked what tribe they're from, but there's the color. Like, there's so many things that I think could inspire much more within each session if the players, again, not every chance they took, but were given and took more agency with expressing their character outside of just how they act and how they speak. Yeah. I always think I have more to say, and then sometimes it's just like, nope, that was the end of the conversation. And yeah, I think for DMs, if you struggle and you're stuck here in this pure narrative, the best thing to do is just, again, nuance. Like, little tiny things will start to get you towards that more entertaining performance level DMing. And players, same thing. It's adding whatever makes your character unique. It's adding something, and whether it's just a mention of it or some sort of an embodiment of it. If your character is sassy, you don't have to always be in character, but if they're going to make a sassy remark, try, I don't know how else to say it, but other in character, but you don't have to be in character the whole time. But if your character is aggressive, make sure the threats sound different than the rest of your character speaking, I guess is kind of what I'm saying, is focus on things that can highlight what your character is about and bring them to life more. And that over time, just doing that over and over will kind of get that second nature going, and you'll start to really figure out who these characters are. And the fourth and final level of roleplay that I find is, you don't see this as much, but it's very similar to the narrative roleplay, but it's one step more detached. So this is, I call this more like the meta roleplay. And I find this is the most detached form of role-playing that I tend to see. It's usually like within the first couple gaming sessions of someone who's brand new. And this is more of the, the full-on, I'm detached, my character does that happens. Okay, well, he would say something about this. He's going to ask about that. Like, it's basically not putting any effort in or really not having any sort of connection. And it's more of like how you would treat a video game, where you would just be like, well, I want that to happen. So does that work? Whereas, you have the narrative gameplay where you're at least putting in some effort, where, you're discussing, the intent, the levels of what you want to do. You're even talking it from the character's point of view, whereas that metagaming level is just, again, the only way I can describe it is just, if you've seen it, it's just that pure detachment of, I'm not the character, this isn't my character, it's a character, it's a game, it's a dice roll. For the most part, it's like, the idea of it being a game, like an interactive game, versus it being a game to win, is kind of what I see in most of these people. Or it's just the whole, it's my first time, I have no idea what I'm doing, and they're not really familiar with like tabletop and role-playing games in general. The only real way to suss out like what style they are is to keep gaming with them and see if it changes. But again, for the most part, it's not really like a major issue that I see for most DMs. I don't think I've ever met a DM who's like this, because I can't even imagine, if this is how you play, why you would be a DM or even play D&D if you're not brand new. But yeah, if you're a DM and you experience this with a player, it's one of two things. It's either they're absolutely brand new, have no idea what they're doing, have no idea what they want to do with it, or they just have no interest, and maybe they're doing this because they want to make you feel better. Maybe it's a friend of yours, or maybe they just feel, I don't know, I don't want to say stuck up, but maybe they just feel like, I don't want to, like, I don't play it like that. I don't, I don't become a character. I'm not an elf, guys. Like, they may just be too cool for the whole indulgence thing, but they thought the idea of actually playing a strategy game was more fun. Because I do see a lot of people who want to approach this from the strategy point of view, and they do have that little bit of a detached feeling. But then again, that that always comes down with how you're going to build your gaming group and how you're going to find players. I don't usually see this type of gaming style last for anybody who wants to actually play the game. I usually, again, if I see this last for more than a couple gaming sessions, it's usually because the person's there, not because they really want to be, but because they feel like it would be, they're probably doing someone a favor. That's kind of how I feel about that one. Best thing to do with this one is just encourage it, and encourage the gameplay, encourage more detail, and shift the conversations. Constantly ask the right questions. If they're constantly feeling detached, don't say, what does your character do? Start asking them, well, what do you do? Change the narrative to where they're, stop having them talk about their character as, something that they're not even really in control of, and kind of bring it focused in on, again, kind of the technique that I like to do as a DM is trying to get the player to think as if that's the situation that they're in. And I think once you kind of employ that after a couple gaming sessions, you're going to kind of pull players out of that like meta gaming, that meta role play, and you're going to start seeing them more in that narrative, and then possibly start bleeding into actually developing like an in-character persona. And then eventually, again, depending on if you want this for your gaming group, you can work on getting everybody up to that performance level. But I mean, like I said before, I'm most comfortable doing that like in character with just heavy narration. I think that works for me and my gaming group, but it's also dependent upon, what are you trying to achieve with it, right? If you are running a campaign or a gaming group that is all about the role play, like everybody just loves their characters, they want to be in character, they want to meet other, NPCs, and they really want to have all of that dialogue, I mean, go for it. If that's the gaming group, I'm not successful in those gaming groups because I just can't keep up, and I'm jealous. I always end up leaving jealous because I can't do that. But at the same time, as much as I like it and as much as I enjoy watching it, I also recognize it's not even that I just am not good at it. I just don't enjoy that type of D&D as much because it's more like that full on like playing the character. For me, it's fun in moments, but I do really like the puzzles. I like the challenges of D&D. I like thinking what's going to happen, which is probably why I really like being a DM, because I like being challenged by my players. But even as a player, I enjoy doing things as my character. I enjoy thinking as my character. I enjoy responding as my character. But I enjoy playing D&D, like playing the character much more than being my character, if that makes sense. And the thing is where I draw the line is like I love the characters that I make. I love doing things, but I'd much rather respond as the character than like always be in the mindset of the character and thinking more about that than just the general game, in and of itself. But that's I will put a caveat that is probably primarily because, again, with my preference for more open world and more like expensive gameplay in terms of taking a character as far as it can go or until they die, instead of just doing like campaigns or one shots or specific linear storylines. And that really is something that I haven't really mentioned throughout this whole thing, is this is all from that mindset of having the storylines, right? So for me, having a more of an open world concept makes the world a lot more dynamic. So it is a lot more challenging to be with, playing with my players and having them come up with things and constantly taking me in directions that I may or may not have pre-planned. So that's my challenge, constantly making sure that I'm keeping up with them and what they want to do and providing my story to them. And as a player, I'm always interested in what's the next puzzle, what's the next teaser, what's the next thing the DM's going to throw at us that we have to solve. But that kind of goes side by side with my lack of enjoyment with a lot of the module-like campaigns and the linear storyline campaigns, because in those ones I almost feel more like again, not like everything's predictable, but because there's going to be that end point, I'm more focused on just completing the task, whereas I feel like those shorter ones, those linear ones, are much more enjoyable when you fully engulf yourself in the character, because there is a start and an end. There are boundaries. And in those cases, I would say that's the strongest case I would make, is if you're doing a one shot or if you're doing like small linear type campaigns, those are great for that full on performance level, because you have bounds already, so you don't have to think that far outside of the limits, right? You have to think about what's being presented to you, and then you can put a lot more effort into having fun with the character. And I think that's where I would have a lot more fun actually playing and acting out a character for the majority of the gaming session. But because I like that more open world, that investment level, that, let me build up a character and let me see where I can take it and, follow goals and see things through, I think that's why that level of being able to respond as my character, but keep more of that narration and more of that that more narrative gameplay going. I think that's probably why I prefer that, both as a DM and as a player. It's just it's that approach of which type of gameplay we all like. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's pretty much the topic that I wanted to cover today, was mainly just discussing how I look at roleplay. And those are my four types. It's the performance level, it's the in character, you have the narrative, and then you have meta. Each one slightly more involved than the last. All have their pros and cons. I don't really see, as you notice, I don't really see a lot of cons in a lot of these. I think they can all be used. I think that every DM can encourage players from one to the next. I think that, again, just like everything, it's a team effort. Everybody should be on the same page. But even if you're not, there are ways to work with it. Like I said, if you're a DM and you have a player who is really, really all about performance, but you're not, adding just more details that they can respond to and work with it is something that's, I think, going to be great for the for your players. If you're a DM who really gets into your NPCs and you just can't find a way to get that out of your players, that one's really going to come down to whether or not they're going to want to go out, full out with that, in character and then, acting out and everything. But more questions can always lead to, I don't want to say more effort, but more questions from DMs to their players, I think, will always end up with getting more out of players. It's something that I learned a long time ago, kind of the hard way, but I learned when I was first DMing, I didn't ask my players enough questions. And because I was expecting to be the answer book. I was expecting I'm going to have all the questions asked of me. I have to be the encyclopedia. I have to be ready for them. And what I learned over time is that my gaming sessions were plateauing. And I couldn't really figure out why, because I had everything ready, but I couldn't quite... I thought a lot of the times it was me. I was changing up how I would describe things. I would change up what I would describe, when I would bring things in, at what point would people be alerted of certain things. And after a while, it dawned on me that it wasn't necessarily my approach to what was going on. It was that I was taking what the players wanted at face value without trying to dig deeper into what else they wanted. So that change in my mindset, by trying to figure out, okay, if I've done all of these things, if I changed all these ways and I'm still plateauing in my gaming sessions, let me figure out, from their point of view, what they're expecting. And so I would just ask more questions. I would ask what the intents are, what their characters are thinking, how would their character go about doing that? Can you describe, just make them describe in more detail what's going on, because a lot of the times the players, I'm sure, are excited for their idea. I know I'm always excited for my idea, but you're trying to be a courteous player. You want to just kind of get your idea out there. You kind of want to get the game moving, but a lot of the times it's so clear in our heads that when we say it, it doesn't come out as clear as day to everybody else. So as a DM, I started just asking more of these follow-up questions to get my players to give me more of that narrative build-up. And it's worked. It not only helps me get more and be able to respond more, so I can have this back and forth with them. If I ask them questions, I get more of their interest, and then I give them a lot more narration, which in turn gives them much more to interact with, which leads to more questions, and that cycle continues. And yeah, I think that if you are a DM and you want to move your players around from wherever they're at, and this isn't just for storytelling, or role playing, but for anything, if you want to start to get them to move, not just giving them ideas of what they can do, but asking them questions is always a great way to inspire them to do things and help them kind of come up with the idea on their own. I mean, they know that you're helping them, but the idea is that they don't feel like they're being told how to play. By asking them questions, they're kind of going to start thinking and responding like that over time. And hopefully they'll start to predict those questions. So they'll have those answers and they'll formulate what they want to do in their descriptors. They'll formulate all of that more precisely and more clearly. And then as the gaming, as you guys just continuously game together, those gaming sessions are just going to get more and more creative, because everyone's going to be inputting, again, based on the questions that you started. And I think, yeah, DMs, that's a huge factor. I think that a lot of new DMs don't have, is new DMs are prepared to answer all the questions, but they're not asking as many as they should. So, Let's see here. Bobicus, have you ever seen the 8 types of fun? Is this a legitimate real thing, or is this in D&D? Because I have not heard of that, but it sounds more like a kind of like a psychology thing. But yeah, I have not heard of that. I'll have to actually look that up. I don't know if that's D&D or not. Is it 8 types of fun? Okay, so I've looked up quick little Google search here. So we have to the 8 different types of fun: sensation, fellowship, challenge, fantasy, narrative, discovery, expression, submission. That is actually fantastic. Thank you so much for that. I think it is off. Yeah, no, 100% often applied to D&D. I would agree with you. That is actually a fantastic concept, because I've often had discussions with other DM friends of mine about like how we describe D&D to people, and like the pillars of D&D. That's another episode I need to do about like the pillars of D&D in terms of what makes up the game, right? Like if you had to break it down into the smallest pieces, what makes up D&D? And really, it's a big list, but I do really like this list, because you're right. I mean, sensation is probably not as close to D&D in terms of all of these. I mean, I guess, everyone likes to roll dice, so I mean, I guess you could say that the sensation of rolling dice is good. But I mean, all these other ones, fellowship, playing with a D&D group and a party and actually getting along, and overcoming challenges, whether they're real or not. Excuse me, guys. Oh, but overcoming challenges together, and thinking about plans, and cooperating. Making not just decisions, but compromises for the better of the team. The challenges, this is one of the pillars that I have in my list is, D&D is not just combat. It's not just dice rolling, but there's dialogue, there's thought puzzles that go along with it. And yeah, people love those challenges. I mean, that's one of the things that I love about being a DM, because my challenge is, keeping up the story, keeping up the consistency with the world wherever my players want to go. But as a player, I enjoy more challenges that are like thought-provoking challenges, like overcoming certain puzzles, whereas I know some people who prefer the challenges of combat. They actually like to figure out an enemy's weakness, or knowing an enemy's weakness, how does the team overcome that in the midst of battle. And then, fantasy, of course. I mean, fantasy is a fantastic aspect of fun. I think we've done it. I think we've all done that since a child. I mean, imagination has, basically always been with us. And yeah, I mean, this game is nothing but fantasy. Narrative, I think everybody, to a small extent, likes to hear themselves talk, or at least when they're passionate about something. And I think that this is why I like the idea of DMs asking player questions, because I feel like there are players out there who don't feel like they add as much to the game, and I think asking more questions allows them gives them more of the understanding about how much they're actually adding in and how much of their input affects the game. Discovery is a great one. This can mean a lot of different things, whether it's discovering new rules, new monsters, new books, new editions, or what's new in the D&D session. What's the new cave, what's the new dungeon, what's the new NPC we got to talk to. Expression, expression 100%. I think no matter what, and this is actually, expression is great for this particular topic. So no matter what your level of roleplay is, whether you are fully interested in becoming this character and you are that character, or just being able to, respond as it, or even just having an idea of who that character could be, I love that all of this is just an expression of ourselves. This is something that my DM had brought up many, many years ago to me that I'll never forget. And he told me that one of his favorite things about D&D, especially about being a DM, is watching people create characters. Because to him, he looked at it as no matter who you are, the characters that you create in D&D, no matter how obscure, are a facet of yourself. He always liked to look at it as every character is somewhere deep inside of you. That character is something about you, like a type of your personality. And that always stuck with me. I always liked that because over time, creating multiple characters, I did feel like even though I would create characters that absolutely were not me on a day-to-day basis, they were either characters that I always wanted to be or that I had a curiosity about. I mean, there was some part of me, somewhere deep down inside that wanted that outlet. So I definitely see that there is something to be said about that. And yeah, I've always kept that with me and always just been curious when I watch my players create their characters. I'm always interested. Let's see. Baba Kiss, what we got here? Andrew has a big rant about allowing players to define the world versus interpreting the world through the DM. So, allowing players to define the world versus interpreting the world, the world through the DM, is a discovery expression conflict. I'm huge on discovery, not so big on expression. I don't like having too much authorial control. It's one of the reasons I don't really enjoy DMing. And I totally understand that, absolutely. So this is actually, I wish Kage was here because he and I have, we've talked about the different approach that we have to our realms. And this is actually kind of along the lines of that. But we both are, I think, on that same area where we have this world that we've created. We have the rules, we have the scenery, we have all of these things that are there. But at the same time, it is the players that are living in it. They're the ones experiencing it. So as much as I know what's in my head, I've talked about this before with my realm and the reason why I don't use like tabletop stuff. I don't use maps. I draw things out live because I want my players to experience the world as their characters would. Wherever they go, they will figure out what's there. But their interaction will drastically change and evolve what's happening. And I really like that. I don't like this idea of saying like, no, this is where you are. This is exactly how it looks. You're not allowed to think of anything else. If I don't say it, it doesn't exist. Or, or have that, like you said, that authoritative control where, what you see is what you get. That's it. Nothing. I really enjoy my players coming up with those details or, again, just narrating their existence in the world because those little things evolve every aspect of the game. And no matter how good of a DM you are, like, you can't be that immersive without players, you know what I mean? I love coming up with those details, but that's just because my mind just doesn't ever shut off and it likes to be creative. So I love coming up with all of that. But it's also why I'm not huge on memorizing the books. It's why I have all of my my foundational rules memorized. I have the books that I need. So during gameplay, we'll always reference the books. I'm big on, thinking beyond the book, but it's not, I don't want the thinking, my concept of thinking beyond the book to be confused with the concept of rule of cool, because we all like the rule of cool. It's a great concept to use once in a while. But thinking beyond the book is not the same thing, because thinking beyond the book is the difference, I think, between knowing and having rules that won't change versus having a foundation to make all the rules make sense, but allowing for justifiable alterations. So, it's one thing to, if you're going to play by the book, it's going to be really difficult because the moment you put your party up against an enemy that one of them has faced before or they've happened to read before in the book, they know all of its weaknesses and it doesn't matter what you throw at them because if they're well read, they're going to know everything to do. Whereas I don't suggest just homebrewing absolutely everything and just, making things up from the ground up all the time, because then that also gets, it can rub people the wrong way. I mean, if that's your deal, that's your deal. But I like the idea of taking the foundations of the book and then altering it to what makes sense for the situation that the characters and the players are going to find themselves in. And yeah, I think that that's kind of where, my direction's always been, is just using the book as a good foundation, but allowing yourself to understand that the book doesn't define every possible situation and every justifiable situation. I actually just saw a video on this. Someone was doing a rant on YouTube, and I really agreed with this one. And she was saying that she was really sick and tired of loot tables, and I kind of agree with this. Her point was really fantastic. It was that loot tables basically have destroyed treasure finding in D&D, and the idea was that if you really look at how the tables are, it's kind of ridiculous some of the things that players can find on some of those loot tables. I mean, it's already ridiculous how like varied some of those loot tables are in terms of like, oh, you can find 12 gold, or you can find a rod of 3 wishes, and it's like that's a big difference there. But I also find that when it's encouraged to use these things, but the main point she was trying to make is that how many amazing and fantastic treasure items are there out there that never see the light of day in these campaigns, that were painstakingly made and would be beautiful in a campaign, but will never see the light of day because it's not on a treasure table. And I kind of like this. I think her fix was basically making like a treasure table that's based off of a tiered system as a default in the books. Instead of naming the items that you would get, have those things be a certain tier of item, and then there's either a separate roll table or the DM can decide. But I gotta say, that is a unique topic. I do kind of agree with that. So that's like a little bonus topic for today, that treasure tables may be destroying D&D. Anyway, that is, we've made it just over an hour. I think that covers everything I wanted to talk about today in terms of the types of roleplay, at least how I see it. Again, I'm really interested. For those of you who see this on YouTube, leave a comment. Let me know what types of roleplay that you define it as. I'm really curious if there's any that I missed, or whether you agree with me or not. I'm just really curious. Do you have more than 4? I feel like there's a lot of nuanced, and there's a lot of like different types of it, but these are my main top categories. I think that there's a lot of subcategories here. But yeah, let me know what you all think. I gotta go take my lady out to dinner tonight, so I will see you all probably on Sunday or Monday. I know Kage's gonna try to be back in the studio on Monday, so we'll be here probably by then. But for the rest of you, have a fantastic weekend. Babakis, thank you so much for being here again. It's fantastic to have you as always. Always enjoy your input. If you are going to be streaming later this weekend, I will try to catch you. Have a great and fantastic night, and I will hopefully see you on Monday.